Hello everyone. So I am making a short, also known as Knicker. So the measurement I'll be needing is Knicker length is 21 inches. So the band is 32 inches. So the tight, also known as lap, lap, is 24 inches, and the bottom, also known as knee, the knee is 21 inches. Although this one is not reaching my knees, but it is 21 inches the total length for the short. So now I want to trim it off, trim the edges. I'm trimming the edges now, although I should have created a borderline as my starting point, but I'm trying to manage my fabric, so let me just trim it off. So now I'm measuring my length, 21 inches, remember. So, and I will have to add the band allowance, which is 1.5. Remember, our knicker is having a band at the front and elastic rubber at the back. So this is 21 inches. So I'll draw a straight line for the bottom part. Sorry, my chalk is not reflecting well. So now the next thing is to deduct 1 inch from the knee, 1 inch, as you can see. So I'll create a slant all the way from the top to the bottom. So as you can see, so I've created my slant. So now the next thing I'll be doing now is to mark my band. Remember, our band is 32 inches, so that is 32 divided by 4. That's 8 inch. So I'll mark my 8 inches now, 8 inch. So now I'll consider my sewing allowance front and back, so that's half, that's 1 inch. Then the 2 inches for my flap, the zipper at the front, so I'll mark it. So don't forget, the 8 plus 1 is our initial band. So now from there you measure your crush. The crush I'll be using for this medium size is 11.5. Although any measurement from band 28 to band 35, 36, so it's recommended to use 11.5. So now the height is 24 inches. So that is 24 divided by 2, 12. I'm marking 12 right now for my lap. Sorry, you can also call it tight. So I mark it all the way from the point I marked my crush, remember. So from that point I will have to curve it down to my band point. So remember, the flap is still there, but one thing is that for my zip now, 8 inches, I'm using 8 inches for my zip because the zip I'm using is 8 inches. So now remember, this hips is between 36 to 39, the hips I'm dealing with, so automatically it's already accurate. So but let's assume you are working with bigger measurements, so you might have to consider the hips before starting. Thank you. So now let's draw our flap, for the zipper allowance. So this is it. I'm drawing my flap now, you can see. So now the next thing I'll have to consider now is my bottom. Remember, it's 21, so that is 21 divided by 2 is 10.5. So that is 10.5. I'll mark it. So then I'll have to connect it to the lap. So you can see I'm connecting it, so it's very simple to draft. So now let's start cutting, but before that, let's just mark our pockets, where we are going to fix our pocket. That's 7 inch by 2.5, 7 inch by side and 2.5 at the top. If you are working with bigger measurements, you can use 3 inches or 2 3/4. So let me just notch it so that it won't give me a problem when I'm sewing. So now let's start cutting it all through. So you have to be careful when cutting the crush, not to tamper with the cuff. So because the 2 inches we use for the allowance must be maintained all through. I mean for the flap. So now we're cutting. So sorry, we forget to add our sewing allowance. I mean for the hem at the bottom. Sorry. So approximately 2. So sorry. So let's continue our cutting. Now let me cut off the slant. Remember, we slant it all the way from down. So now let me just cut it off. The edges is not so important for many clothes like that, so you have to trim it off. So now let me notch my pocket. And remember, we mark it the other time 7 inches. So now let me just mark it wrong side. So now the next thing is our back. So as you can see, we are done with our front block. So the next thing is to cut out our back, the back of the knicker. So remember, the front will be having band, while the back we are having elastic. So you have to lay it properly. You see the way I lay it, I didn't follow the same direction I cut the front. So you have to somersault it. I mean, just change it. So now let me just trim the bottom, as you can see, so that everything can be equal. Sorry, I had to check something out. So now let's continue with our cutting. So remember, we have to consider the crush. I should have cut it up, but let me just shock it here. I mean, let me retrace the cuff part, as you can see, so that it will be easier for me to add my elastic allowance and band allowance. So for the back now, remember, we have to add the band allowance and elastic allowance. Remember for the front, the allowance we use is 1.5. So just mark it out for an easy calculation. 1.5. And mark it out. Let me just read it so that it can be easy to calculate. Then we have to consider our elastic allowance now, which is approximately 2.5. So now that's 2.5. So in total, the total allowance I'm adding to the upper parts of the back is 4 inches. So that's what we'll be holding our elastic. So now let's continue our cutting. So as you can see, there's no magic there. It's very simple. So now the sewing allowance for the back, I said the sewing allowance from the front should always be at the back. Basically, for every trousers or pants or anything, the sewing allowance is always added to the back, because our back is more shallow than the front. So now let me just cut it out. So that's 2.5 allowance. Then I also cut the upper part. So now our back is ready. As you can see, there's no magic here. So it's simple as ABC. So if you are enjoying this video, kindly like or give us a thumb up, please. So now these are our 2 front piece. As you can see, I'm trying to measure the band. I will need for the front piece. So it's an approximately 10 inches. So that will be 11 plus sewing allowance. Then I'm using 11.5. 11.5, sorry, approximately. So that because the right side of our Knicker will be having SS flap, remember, so that's why I'm using 11.5. So now I'm trying to cut out the band, but let me just trim these edges because it sometimes disfigure our fabric. So now let me just trim it off before proceeding to cut our band. So now for the band, I'm using 4 inches for the wideness, and I will have to slant it because of the pattern. Once the garment is of a straight pattern, the band must be in a cross form. So that's 4 inches now. So I have to split it. Remember, it's 2 fronts, one for the right and the other one for the left. So now let me take my 11.5 off. The length of the band. So now let me just put my allowance to be on the safer side, because I don't know if the material is going to shrink anyway. So now the next thing now is to consider my front. We've already added the flap, so the zipper allowance. So now you remember the left side always overlap the right side. You can also check your trousers at home. So we don't need to touch the left side, then we don't need to trim it off. But for the right side, we need to trim the flap off. The allowance we put. I need to trim it off and put a normal flap. So for the right side only. So I want to put a proper flap. You can also leave it like that. Once you whip it, it's okay. But I just feel like using a normal flap because I want it to look ready-made. So now I'll be cutting out my flap for the right front. So 8 inches, or I'm using 9, remember, to be on the safer side. So I now have to curve it a little bit, then cut it straight up. So now, as you can see, I'll just sew it and turn it to the right side back. So now the next thing is to consider my pocket lining. Remember, it always produces itself from the back. Whenever you cut the back part, pocket lining will automatically produce itself. So I have to cut it out. So these are pocket lining. So we are already done. I'll cut my pocket later. Yes, pocket for the side and for the part